Okay, everybody, thank you for coming back to the Xanadu Review. I'm your host, Prester John Anders, but as always, you can call me PJ. Well, today I have a writer on who is popular on Substack who goes by the Cultural Romantic, and she has a kind of interesting series of topics that she covers. So, Mr. Romantic, if you'd like to tell the audience a little about yourself, your writing, and we'll jump into it.
Okay. I actually studied writing when I went to college. So I studied literature, but very quickly I realized it doesn't really pay and I need to find something that pays me money. And I did a quick pivot to marketing and advertising, and especially digital marketing, which was gaining steam at that point of time. And in the 2010 era, I was really doing all the digital marketing that everybody hates now. I didn't work for BuzzFeed, but I did everything but that. Um, and over the years, I've always written on social media, and Substack was just the next logical step.
Yeah, it seems to be it's the platform that's starting to pick up right now, but it's funny. My wife has done basically the exact same pattern when she went to school for English literature, found it didn't pay, and has gone into digital marketing. So, many such cases, as they say.
Yes.
So I guess I'd like to kind of dig into a little bit more and tell me more about, if you want to get into yourself and how you came to love, because you write about a lot of different topics, but first and foremost, maybe one of the interesting things to get into is you write about classical literature and how maybe sometimes film adaptations aren't, maybe up to snuff, as you might put. I know you had a very interesting conversation with Forrest Gren, and I listened to that. So
Yeah.
what inspired your love there?
So I grew up in a family where everybody reads, and everybody reads in English, which is unusual for the country where I'm from, which is India, where a lot of people don't read, and a very small section of people reads in English. And even those people who read in English read a lot of modern, contemporary literature, because they maybe went to school in a foreign university or whatever. But my family's history with this is very interesting, because they used to work for the British Empire. Almost all of my grandparents, great grandparents had some sort of a role there. And so they were given a British education in the Victorian times, which involved reading classics. So after the British left, my family continued that trajectory. My grandma gifted me my first classics. She gifted me Jane Eyre and Sherlock Holmes and the I think Pride and Prejudice and a couple of others. She said, okay, enough of children's books. It's time to read grown-up books now. I think I was 11 or 12. And I used to read very typical, Nancy Drew and all of those childish books. And yeah, that just inspired my lifelong love for it, my grandma's gifts to me. Yeah, she also gave me George Eliot's book, Mill on the Floors, which is just mind-blowing, beautiful, soul searching. It's not even a love story. It's a story of a brother and a sister in at the turn of the industrial age, where their village is moving from a mill, a literal mill, which runs on water and is going industrial, and how that impacts their life. So that was one of the first books that sort of spoke about human emotion. And I think one of the reasons I really love classical literature is that it really lets you get into the wildness of human emotions, right? Because often when we express human emotions, we express them with a lot of civility, whether it's affection or kindness or whatever. It's expressed with a lot of civility. But in the classics, there's a certain wildness to it. There's a certain I don't know how to describe it, a certain paganity to it, where
Pre-modernity.
yeah, where even their kindness is so wild. It's like an animal's kindness, right? If I mean, to take the typical example of Heathcliff, when he's kind, he's kind like a horse would be kind to you, or a dog would be kind to you. There's something brutal in his kindness also. So those things, I think, reading it at that young age and reading it with the excited gaze of my grandma and my mother, everybody waiting to see what I think about it, made me sort of a lifelong sucker for the classics.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. How do I want to put it? So right now I'm kind of tinkering on a piece on the Odyssey, because they have, the Christopher Nolan movie coming out, and people feel, all kinds of different ways about it. And I don't find the culture war angles particularly interesting, but I
Yeah,
do
same.
find, I mean, first of all, like I'm so on Christopher Nolan to begin with. It looks like it's going to be kind of drab, and kind of like what I like about Greek mythology is kind of how you alluded to, it is kind of what I'm trying to write about is, like the pre-modern people just have such a total different understanding of the world and emotions, and how like natural world interacts. They didn't have that separation of the natural and the supernatural, and to me that's much more interesting of a subject to talk about. And kind of like how you alluded to, of even a couple hundred years ago, it was just such a different way of feeling. I don't know if that's due to mass media or psychology or what have you, but I feel like especially older, that's part of why I'm a big history buff too, because be it older literature or reading history, what have you, like it's in some ways it's incredibly familiar, because people are people, but the way that they interact with the world is just so incredibly different.
I just wanted to confirm what I meant when I said this was that
Mm-hmm.
modern literature doesn't do justice to people. People are
Mm-hmm.
still the same, we feel wild emotions and we express them softly, but modern literature doesn't do justice to the emotional interiority of the people that
Mm-hmm.
they are writing about, because it's also sort of processed through 10 layers of irony, and then there's nothing left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right.
I would
But
agree. It's an
yeah, I
expression
mean,
thing.
I know I have met men like Heathcliff.
Mm-hmm.
but there's no one writing men like Heathcliff anymore, or Mr. Rochester, or Oedipus. Oedipus Rex is, since you were talking about Odyssey, Oedipus Rex is such a beautiful character, and of course some really fucked up things happen to him. And the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, even in modern novels, fucked up things happen to people, but rarely does it get expressed with that sort of, I don't want to say depth, I want to say wildness, where you're so true to your emotions, and that comes through in the book. I feel a lot of modern authors are sort of distilling the emotional content. They're sort of pandering to the reviewers before the reviewers even see their book. They're like, oh, what is he going to think? Is this, I hate to say the word, woke enough? Is this going to please this person? Is this going to please that person? While, say, someone like the Bronte sisters, they probably just wrote what they felt, and they didn't even expect to become the successes that they did, and they said, okay, to hell with it. That is why I'm happy about the sort of resurgence of anonymity online, because I think it makes people more free. Because even the Bronte sisters wrote under pen names. Charlotte Bell was Currer Bell. And I think that's good, because it sort of frees you. You're not afraid for your personal life anymore, which often happens with the internet, where people come and throw eggs at your
Mm-hmm.
house, metaphorically or whatever. So
Or
in that
literally
sense, I think,
occasionally.
yeah. So I think the return of anonymous writing will be good for writing, because you're not going to pander as much as you should or would, or at least I hope that's
Yeah.
how it will be.
At least that's part of the reason I do. I use a pseudonym kind of for a similar reason, but also
Yeah.
just to me, it's a good way to keep my ego out of it, since it's not Prester John is not my real name. It's almost a fictional character. So I don't have to worry about it being connected to my real life. Not that I think I'm doing anything particularly controversial, but you never know. As well
Yeah,
as
yeah.
I don't have
Yeah, I don't think
um
it's about being controversial per se. I think it's more that a lot of people just, especially artists are so nervous about being judged for their work. I mean, we want everybody to see our work, but we're also just as nervous wrecks at the thought of somebody seeing our work, right? So
mhm.
that sort of dichotomy is better dealt with when you're anonymous.
Yeah,
I believe
I would
you
agree. I think
kind of create a distance from your art yourself. It's like, oh, that's not me. The cultural romantic wrote that.
yeah, exactly. Prester John, and I can delete Prester John anytime I want, and I don't
Yeah,
have to deal with that anymore.
yeah.
But do you think because this kind of ties into the larger themes of what you write about, is it just what do you think? Is it just that feedback loop specifically from the internet? Sometimes I think that's part of it. Sometimes I think the way that everybody frames everything and categorizes emotions in like a very psychology forward way. Like there's
Yeah,
somebody like,
therapy.
yeah, I don't know if you're a fantasy person, but somebody like, Brandon Sanderson, who's a fantasy writer who I read here and there, sometimes it feels like him or people who are in that milieu will just take, the DSM and like, all right, this person is bipolar. Let me write it. And like talking about mental health and mental illness has become just like one of these sacred cows that I feel like online reviewers and that conversation seems to love, but there seems to be a disconnect with general audiences.
Yeah, and this is one of my big shibboleths. I don't read fantasy. I don't know the author you're talking about. I think the last time I read fantasy was Rick Riordan. My brother was reading it when he was a kid, so I just joined him. But I agree that this happens where they sort of tick a bunch of check boxes and they're like, oh, his sun sign is this. He has sex in this style and he has 1, 2, 3 mental illnesses and he likes to wear the color blue, you know.
Like
But
character sheets almost.
yeah, it's almost like the mental illness is a character trait, and I see it as unserious as sun sign. Why are you telling me this? Why won't you let me discover my way around your character? Why are you so desperate to categorize him? Because he's fictional, right? Why are you telling me what mental illness a fictional character has? Because you cannot know him fully as a person. I can only know him as much as you have written him. And for a real person to be diagnosed, they have to go to a real therapist and get diagnosed by a real therapist. Why are you diagnosing a character? You're not his therapist, you're just his writer.
I think
There's almost no justice. It's so unjust for anybody who's not a therapist to diagnose someone, even a fictional character. Like, what gave you the right? And it's not just with your own characters. People online, like you said, have this thing where they diagnose other people's characters, historical characters. Thank God they haven't diagnosed like God. What is Jesus's? I know what is Jesus' sun sign, but what mental illness does he have, right? I'm just happy they don't do that. Maybe some people do it. At least I've not seen it, but I find it very
I'm sure they
offensive.
do.
Huh?
I said I'm sure they do. Somebody has out there.
Yeah, so yeah, I have a
No.
big problem with this, and you're basically substituting people's knowledge of a particular illness for a character study, right? So if you say this person is bipolar, you expect me as an audience to have a sort of pop culture understanding of bipolarity, and then you want to say, okay, that's his character study, when actually as a writer you have to do so much more work to describe a character's behavior or nature or whatever. you're sort of using a shorthand.
Yeah, to
Okay.
build on what you were saying, that's to a certain degree I get where some people are coming from with that, since I think, people who have mental illness, they would like to see their struggles represented. But I do think I would agree that sometimes it's a little too explicit. Like I know you said you're not a sci-fi person, or not a fantasy person, so I'd imagine you're not a sci-fi person. But just as an example, I remember there was a character in Star Trek who Data, who people later after the fact said, oh, like this person's like autistic, and the writers later said, like, I see why people said that, but I'm glad we didn't have that language at the time, because then again, you're putting him in a box, and it's like, oh, this
Yeah.
is how an autistic person deals with X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
And it's very limiting, both, I feel like, the writers and the characters at times, which is not to say you can't have, people with mental illness, but sometimes it does feel very in a box, and like you have to have, it's kind of, excuse me, kind of a catch-22, because in those very hyper online review spaces, people want the box tick to the representation, but if that person's portrayal or experience of mental illness doesn't line up with the readers, then that can be a can of worms of its own. I think maybe it's better to just
Yeah.
write the characters and let people interpret it how they
Yeah.
will.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a bipolar person and you're writing a bipolar character, you probably know about it very well, and I have no problem with that. My problem is when it is used. I agree with you that people might like to see their struggles represented, yes, but my problem is when it is used as shorthand for character description. Right? It sounds like a bunch of girls are sitting together, and one girl says, "You know what? This new guy I met, he is a Gemini." And all the other girls immediately go, oh, of course. Right? You're using it like that. You're not describing the person, you are not individualizing the person, you're sort of using the group identity to let people assume things about that person.
Yeah. At times it almost feels like there's a certain type of person who deals with mental illness and these kind of types of person, like it almost feels like religious, if that makes sense. And I don't
Yeah.
mean that punitively. It's just the way, somebody talks about, oh, I have mental illness, they might talk about, like, the devil is testing me or something like that, and just for like the context of how they interact with it sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I compare it to zodiac signs, right? Because for a lot of people, it's
Mhm.
almost religious. Like, I know women who will not date X, Y, Z sun signs just because they think it's a bad match for them. And I'm like, so you're never going to meet a guy if he tells you he's born on, I don't know, December 2nd? How unlucky for a large population to just be cancelled on the basis of that. So I think this is very similar. And then, there's this whole thing of where, oh, you're neurotypical, so you want to understand me, right? And I thought the whole point of having these sort of, sorry,
Oh, no problem.
the whole point of having these sort of descriptions is to have people interact with each other more. But it seems like people are going more and more into their own silos, which is so unfair, because was this the purpose everyone was planning to achieve? And it's the same with the books, right? Oh, this book is for this kind of person, this book is for that kind of person. You might as well say, if you're not born between December 25th and January 25th, don't read this book.
Pretty much.
It's so arbitrary. But I also understand why people want to do it, because it's enjoyable to categorize people, right? It's okay, man, woman is a fair enough category, child, adult is a fair enough category, different countries are categories. You like coffee, I like tea is a category. But at some point of time, we have to recognize that these categories are very frivolous, and they shouldn't really matter to human interaction. Like, I mean, would you never have a meal with someone because they drink coffee and you drink tea? It's so arbitrary.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think it's a function of one of those maybe the online conversation that I think Paradoxically, I think it's a good marketing term, as you probably know. It on paper it
Mm,
sounds good for marketing, right? However,
mm.
like what the cursory research I've done into the topic is, a lot of these modern books are not selling particularly well.
Yes,
So maybe there's something to be said for being a little bit too hyper obsessed with category like that, where it's
yes.
maybe looping back around and like you said, it's like, oh well, I wasn't born between December 2nd and March 23rd, so I guess this book's not for me.
Worst kept secret of the media industry that these sort of hyper categorized books and art are not selling that well. And meanwhile, Wuthering Heights, recent adaptation by Emerald Fennell, made crazy money, even though everyone on Substack hated it.
Hmm.
It's made way beyond its budget. It's a adaptation of a 300-year-old book. So maybe the way people are making things needs to be re-examined.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic that you see quite a bit of like a lot of this stuff. And kind of it's interesting you say that, because it kind of made me think of, because you wrote about that newer Taylor Swift album. But again,
Yeah.
I'm neither. I would never dare to say that I don't like Taylor Swift on a public platform unless the Swifties come after me. I'm fine with her. It's not my cup of tea. I don't hate it. But point being, between the Wuthering Heights adaptation or that more recent Taylor Swift album, Substack and people who write about these things, you would think it's, the worst thing ever. However, I found out that more recent Taylor Swift album was like the fastest selling album in the history of the recording industry. So clearly, a lot of normal people like it, but the reviewer class maybe has different taste than the average person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just saw a piece about, I don't know if I'm saying his name correct, Timothy Chalamet, which basically was a girl talking about how he was for the girls and now he's become for the boys. And I was so confused. He's dating a woman. He is seen everywhere with said woman, but he's not for the women. He's for the men because he's dating a woman. What?
As in like gay,
And
or he's like a
no,
quote
no,
unquote
no, that
bro
he is
thing
now,
now.
yeah, he's now appealing only to men and not to women. And I say he is appealing to one woman whom he happens to be dating.
Hmm.
I mean, and there was this whole thing about how he used to be nervous and he looked so awkward. And I said, can you imagine that he was young, nervous, and awkward? And now he's 30 years old and he's a big star and he's not nervous and awkward or young. Confidence
Hmm.
also comes with age. So the sort of deifying of this sort of, you know, personality type of, I want to say, boy band personality.
Hmm.
Trust me, I like it. And I especially used to like it when I was a teenager. But acting like he's become a bad person because he's grown into a man is so stupid. And I said, it's not like he's being Leonardo DiCaprio and having so many different girlfriends. He has one girlfriend, he's loyal to her, he takes her everywhere, he poses with her in the red carpet and in basketball games or wherever. I don't know where he goes. But how has he become for the boys when he's literally for one woman? He's a one woman man.
Well,
So I think a lot of the commentary is also sort of aesthetic commentary, like with Taylor Swift. A lot. I see. I'm not a Taylor Swift fan. I used to. I sort of had a disdain for modern bands.
mhm,
I only listened to stuff from the 70s and 80s, and I think I listened to a couple of her songs on Instagram when I was sick in 2022 because I didn't have anything else to do. And I used to just blindly scroll. My Instagram time back then was 12 hours a day.
oof.
uh, and I didn't have the strength to do anything else because I was very ill. And that's when I discovered her, and I was very impressed with her writing. She's a very good writer, and she writes like, say, Axl Rose would write, which coming from me is a very high compliment because I have a life-size poster of Axl Rose. And so for me, I did not know her before the Eras tour, but a lot of fans who don't like her now in this post-Eras tour, super famous time period, were fans of her when she was more indie and when she just, was a young girl with a guitar, So for them, a lot of them, it's what I've noticed is it's an aesthetic change. It's not like she doesn't write lyrics the way she used to, doesn't sing the way she used to, doesn't present herself the way she used to. That's just that she's too popular, right? If you remember, I don't know if you were into that scene, but I was always in the scene where once a band becomes too popular, the boys stop liking them. Oh no, they're too popular. Oh no, it's not for me anymore. I discovered them early and I left them early, and now that's not my thing anymore. I'm going to find another unknown indie band that I can safely be a fan of without being part of the masses. So I
Yeah.
think the Taylor Swift problem is that, and it's the same with Wuthering Heights, right? Wuthering Heights was sort of something that only literature students read. And now, because it's a movie with Margot Robbie and the Australian guy, Jacob Elordi, everybody knows about it. People are watching it not because it's Wuthering Heights, but because they like the actors. And that makes a lot of literature students mad. And I get it, right? But don't you want more people to read the book? I would rather the book never go out of publication, even if it means, Heathcliff has an Australian accent.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be the through line that I'm seeing of I don't
Yeah.
really exactly follow this thing, but if Timothy Chalamet is young and single, you can project yourself onto being his girlfriend. Then when he has a consistent girlfriend, now not so much. Or, when at least to me, like I'm not it's fine to me. Like the new Taylor Swift sounds pretty similar to the old Taylor Swift, or like indie bands. Like I don't like a band like I like, people say, oh wow, now Weezer is terrible now, but they used to be great. Like musically it sounds incredibly similar, but I think people have this self-perception of themselves where they can see themselves as like the underappreciated wallflower, so to speak. But then when other people
Yeah.
like it, then it becomes, you're a part of that conversation, which to a certain degree I get. There's something romantic, if you will, to having a particular and more sequestered relationship with this media. But, at the end of the day, it is pop culture media. And I think you have to be realistic about these things.
You have to be. You have to be. It's like, a lot of people used to like Japanese manga comics and Japanese anime, but now it's become popular and it's embarrassing for them to like it. And I'm like, the things that you dislike about it already existed. So back then, because it was indie and sort of you had to get the DVDs from Japan or whatever, it was cool. But now it's not, because you can get the DVD in the local store or you can get it on Amazon.
On
I think,
Netflix, whatever.
yeah, yeah. The access to things has made the tastemakers sort of almost inconsequential, and that's upsetting to them, especially if your job is to be a tastemaker. Thank God that's not my job. But if you imagine yourself as sort of a cultural lodestone guiding everybody to the better art that they should be reading, it would be upsetting if Emerald Fennell made Wuthering Heights more popular than the past 50 years of English literature teachers. No offense to them.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of cultural tastemakers have been floundering since the internet age for that reason.
Yeah.
But actually kind of leads me to something else I wanted to talk to you about, because you write under the moniker, obviously, the cultural romantic, and there's two different angles to that, the cultural side and the romantic side. But first I want to talk about like the romantic side. I mean, and maybe even in the classical sense of the word, because we're kind of dancing around. There's a romance to how you will imagine yourself as a fan of Wuthering Heights, a fan of an artist, etc.
Yeah.
And I noticed that about your work, that it's very, I don't want to put it like highfalutin, but in a good way, not in the snarky way people use that you're trying to see something bigger and not necessarily getting into the nitty gritty. And I appreciate that
Yeah.
perspective. If you want to speak to
Yeah.
that a little bit more.
I find a lot of commentators speak about culture, but they sort of hedge their commentary by saying, statistically, 70% people agree with what I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is, you're making cultural commentary. You think Oscar Wilde went and polled people before saying this is what people think or this is what people should think? I think that's sort of cultural commentary that's just philosophically expansive and large, has sort of disappeared because everybody wants to sort of be mathematically consumable. And this happened to me recently where I criticized this sex writer, and somebody replied to me saying, you should do your research and your statistics before writing this. And I said, I don't need to do research to tell you that most people in the world, especially the Western world, are not into BDSM. I don't need to do research to tell you that. And then he found research somewhere that said 12% of people in Netherlands said that they're into BDSM. And I said 12% people is not most people. 12 out of 100 is not most of 100.
Mm-hmm.
And he said,
People
but
love
it's
the
not an
appeal to
instant.
authority like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, and he said something like, but 12% of people are not insignificant. I said, okay, but they still do not decide culture. And then he said, Mormons are not insignificant. And I said, but Mormons shouldn't be offended if I tell them that majority people are not Mormons. Right?
Yeah. No.
I just think these sort of cultural arguments argued on the basis of statistics are sort of killing the point you're trying to make, because everybody is just looking at the graphs and things and sort of, oh, does this match up, right? When what you should be saying is the expansive point, which is that, BDSM is never going to be a part of the Super Bowl, which means it's never going to be part of the majority culture. It is not the way the majority look at their life, and it never will be. It is a minority thing, and that's okay. I have no problem with minority subcultures. It's good for culture to have many different minority subcultures, but to say that they are the majority is wrong. To give access to people from those minority cultures to talk about things that affect the world and say this is what sex is wrong. I think this lady, her name is Ayla, and she wrote something like, women have been porn brained about romance and convinced, just like men are convinced about various degrading acts in porn, that, getting flowers and a beautiful dinner is necessary to have a happy life. And I said, hey, wait a minute. What? Why is everyone taking this as sort of, are you saying, and I remember having this discussion with Kat, crypto gal Kate. I told her, have these people never got flowers for somebody in a non-romantic setting? I mean, I used to grab a bunch of flowers from the wayside and gift it to my mom when I was a kid. Do you really think that, a degrading sexual act is the same as getting someone flowers? Have you never gone to a hospital to visit someone with flowers? It's so strange. And people were just taking this as sort of gospel because she has some statistical data. And I said, no matter what statistical data you have, giving someone flowers is not some, out there, unusual to normal human living gesture. It's not. I refuse to believe that. And I simply refuse to have a conversation in the statistical realm at all, because I always say I'm not a statistician. I'm not interested in a statistical discussion.
Yeah. Well, you can also, the problem being like you can prove pretty much anything with statistics depending on how you ask the question. Like, statistically speaking, you and I are Chinese women because, 51% of people are women. The largest country on earth is China. There you go. And to a certain degree, I understand there's a certain type of person who really finds that way of interacting with the world very comforting, and it's not without its merit, right? Because the scientific mind and that way of viewing the world is important. There's a lot that can be revealed, but like you said, we aren't statistics. People don't live statistically. People live in their own personal experience, and I think that can be, it kind of loops back to what we were talking about with literature of just the hyper categorization of everything kind of makes romance and like the interpersonal, like capital R love romance impossible, but
Yeah.
also like original sense of the word of romanticism, of like in a certain aesthetic and seeing things not in this hyper commodified way. It makes it very difficult at times.
It does. But also, I just wanted to say statistics is not the only science. There are many other sciences. So to be anti-statistics doesn't mean you're anti-science. Philosophy is one of the oldest sciences, and I would rather see life through a philosophical lens. In fact, almost all the sciences and the scientific method was sort of invented by Aristotle. So it's not like I don't have a respect for science. I love Aristotle. I just used to continuously read and reread his this one book I had of his when I was a teenager, his writings. He's a huge influence on me. But Aristotle would never speak of anything in a statistical model, because how things ought to be was his focus, not the nitty-gritty of what is, right? Because people are always aspiring. You're aspiring to be something else. A child aspires to be an adult. If you're an adult, you aspire to be something else. You want to be, if when you're 25, you want to be 30. When you're 30, you want to be 35. And then when you're 35, you want to be 25 again. So people are always aspiring for something. So to say that this is what it is wrong, because people are always changing themselves and trying to become better versions of themselves. And that's the Aristotelian way.
I would agree. And I think that actually is a good segue into something else I wanted to talk to you about, since the tagline of your blog and your page is, you describe yourself as a Western civilization enjoyer. And I'm interested to your perspective, since that's one of these things that has become like a very contentious topic these days. Especially, you say you're from India, and like people in the West are not generally Western civilization enjoyers these days either. There's just so much dialogue and discourse around it, because I think I was talking to somebody on Substack, Hyunwoo Kim, who were kind of going back on the concept, is Western civilization even a real thing? Is Eastern civilization a real thing? I would say yes. I described as, different circles of, culture and language, geography, etc. But all that to say, like, I feel like Western civilization, quote unquote, is in a bit of an identity crisis right now. So, and not a lot of fans of it for the most part, other than like, marble statue, PFP style people. So I'm wondering what's your perspective on it, because I'm interesting enough. And one more thing, and I'll throw it back to you. I feel like when I talk to people outside of the United States or the West, like, or even, like people from India or Romania who have a more positive view of it sometimes than people in, the quote unquote Western world proper do. So what's your thoughts?
I think it goes back to my family and the way I've seen the development in my family versus other people in India, just because of that small bit of westernization in my family. Seven generations ago, my grandmother's grandfather was a judge in British India, and he was first generation educated. He walked 20 kilometers to school, right? And he was educated for free by the missionary nuns. And he just gave an exam and he got through and he became a lawyer and then he became a judge. He gave some landmark judgments in India. But his biggest change was he gave up on religion. He was an atheist. He was one of the first people in my community or even in India um, to decide not to get his children married when they were children. He got all of them educated. His 6 daughters were educated, and all of them got married in their 20s and 30s, 20s, early 20s and late 20s. So that was sort of revolutionary to my family, because every other family, when I hear about what went wrong and why there was like sort of trouble or somebody died, it's because they started having children when they were 12. And this was the norm in India. So that he had one encounter with people outside and he realized that this is what they're doing differently. And this is why their daughters don't die when they're 30, having given birth to 14 children, is because they didn't marry when they were 12, when their bodies were unready. The second thing what he did was he invested all of his money into education. So all of his grandchildren, all of his daughters, they're all highly educated. All of them are double graduates. Some of them have PhDs. So because of that, typically in an Indian household, when a man loses his job, which in a precarious economy like this happens often, the family sort of loses everything, right? You come down to nothing because you're completely dependent on one person. But because in my family there were 2 incomes, even if someone lost their job, there was always a backup. And that is good for a family because you get to build wealth together. And it's good for society because people are more stable. Every person I see who's unstable is because, one, they were not educated. They either never went to school or they were pulled out of school when they were 12. Secondly, they're all single income families, which is unsafe in a precarious economy like India. And thirdly, because they are not educated, they don't have anything to teach their children. Their children have to depend on school for everything. And by everything, I mean even things like, to say sorry or thank you or whatever, because the parents simply don't teach them anything because they don't know anything. And I think all of this is downstream of Western education, and almost all schools in India have the legacy of British education style. The way we have school grades is very similar to British school grades. And we have a public exam in what's called 10th standard, which is the equivalent of 10th grade in America. So a lot of those British cultural artifacts were in India. And to the extent that there is freedom, development, economic progress, it's because of that. I mean, there's a reason why everything is outsourced to India. It's because Indians know English, as opposed to, say, someone in the Philippines or someone in China. And when I say no English, I don't mean that, we speak with the best accents, but that we have a sort of understanding of English since we are 6 years old, because everybody studies in English. Whatever you study, whether it's math, history, science, chemistry, you have studied it in English, as opposed to, say, China or even Germany, where they study it in their native language. So that's one of the huge advantages India has, and that's completely Western civilization. The last thing is, I think, very much overlooked, though nowadays people talk about it, is public safety. I think in India, that's vanishingly rare, except in, say, 4 to 5 big cities where you're somewhat safe as long as you don't go out after 9 in the night. But in the West, I really love it because I could come home in a metro at 1 in the night and walk on a street where there is literally nobody, and I'd be completely fearless. I wouldn't, if I was in India, firstly, that would be an emergency. And secondly, I would have my mom or my sister or somebody on the phone with me all the time because a public place would just simply not be trustable.
Mhm.
And I think that is the biggest achievement of Western civilization, that people can live all by themselves. They can go out late in the night to a bodega, buy a Coke Zero, and come home. And vanishingly rare chances of them being harmed.
Mhm. Yeah,
That
it
is
seems
that is the biggest thing I enjoy about Western civilization.
yeah, that makes sense, and it seems like it's a complicated topic that since I'm somebody who is very interested in like history and different cultures and whatnot. It's trying to figure out a way to be delicate with it, because I have a friend I met on Substack and we've become friends in real life. Rajiv Ram, who he writes here on Substack, and he kind of talks about and understandably, I think there's a lot of people like in India in particular who are, I think, understandably bitter about English colonialism, but that's kind of how he put it to me. It's like, yes, that is definitely a part of it, but there's also a lot of people who are like Anglophiles kind of as a result, kind of what you said. And it's a complicated topic, and it's a really big country, or the subcontinent with a lot of different people with a lot of different experiences and opinions
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
how this is experienced.
Yeah. But when I say Western civilization, what I mean is that it's not, all countries in the Western half of the hemisphere. And it's not all of them at all points of time. It's some of them at some points of time. And then that culture sort of transmuted. So it started with the Greeks, and then it went to the Romans. And then for a long time, it was only Britain that was truly sort of Western civilization. And then a lot of British people went to America, and then Britain and America were Western civilization, especially in the time of Hitler. I mean, France could not be called a civilization at that time. The way they behaved, or the way Poland was treated, the way Germany behaved, that's not Western civilization behavior. What I'm trying to say when I say this is that just because you're born in a country or you have a particular skin tone or a genetic history doesn't make you part of Western civilization. It is a cultural ethos that you have to follow, and it has to be transmitted from generation to generation. If you can't do that, it's lost. And that's why all these Roman marble statue PFPs make me laugh, because I'm like, what are you even doing? I always say this. A British friend of mine said this to me once: "You are more British than me," and it's one of the proudest things someone has said to me, proudest moments of my life, because I genuinely am. I know so much about British history. I know so much about Western history, and I know that it was not always the way it was. Like, for example, Spain had conquered Netherlands and was subjugating them horribly. Denmark, Sweden, and Norway were constantly at war with each other. Just a couple of months ago, I was crossing the border between Denmark and Sweden with a friend of mine, and he pointed out this statue of a bunch of mermaids to me. And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, the last time the Swedes attacked Norway, there were these two girls who alerted everybody, and they went and hid up in the fort while the Swedish army burnt the town to the ground." And so then they built this statue of two mermaids in the honor of those girls. And I was like, wait, how long ago was this? And he said it was the late 1800s, barely 30 years before World War II. So, there was barbarity even in Europe back then. But everybody who implemented sort of Aristotelian Thomas Aquinas thought, and this is why I'm a big fan of Henry VIII, right? Sort of separation of
Mhm.
church and state, that sort of thing. The more they implemented it, the more they became Western civilized. Like my Norwegian friend is around in his late 60s, and he always tells me that when he was a kid in the 50s, Norway had one TV channel that mostly had Russian content because Norway was somewhat pro USSR. I mean, that's crazy considering, what one would associate with Norway today, which is a very modern Western country, where last Christmas there was somebody playing a Mariah Carey song, busking on the street.
Mhm.
So Western civilization is an idea, and that idea must be propagated, and it can be propagated anywhere. Singapore is Western civilization. Hong Kong is
Mhm.
Western civilization.
Yeah,
You don't have to
I can see
be
that.
in the West. Yeah. And
Yeah, it's
and
a
and
certain.
and every feudal fights against it, right? Like
Mhm.
a lot of people, even in Sweden or Norway, have a problem with like sort of American influence, which they see as sort of too modern, too Western, not ancient enough, right? Or all the kids are only watching American TV shows now. And I wrote an article about this because I have friends in many different European countries, and I've visited 10, 11 countries so far in Europe. And all of them are so Americanized. It's so funny, especially when you see online how people are always talking about how Europe is superior to America. And I always say Europe was saved by America. Europeans are very grateful for that. 500,000 American soldiers died saving European lives. And I don't know if you read my article, I'll send it to you. But one of the things I wrote there, which is very touching to me, is that there is an American soldiers cemetery in Netherlands, and you have to bid to maintain graves there. And the bids have been sold out for the next 30 years
Oh wow.
because the locals want to maintain the graves of American soldiers. America is everywhere in Europe. Everybody drinks either Coke Zero or Diet Coke, and it's as big a war there as it is here. I mean, as it is in your
Yeah.
country.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I and I do get why some people push back because you can lose. And this is something that I try to write about because I feel like there's definitely something that can be lost of, like, I guess you could say, like an indigenous culture to any region that what's that quote? Like, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And it's something that I do have a lot of sympathy to, even like, the non-hyper internationalized, or like, the dark sides of the propagation of American culture or colonialism, what have you. But to me, the interesting question becomes, like, how can you maintain a balance? Because on one level, it's good to have higher standards of living, education, etc. But I do kind of feel like even I say this as an American, I feel like something is lost if everywhere is America, because I think there's beautiful things about India's culture, Spain, Germany, what have you. I think it's a delicate balance to strike, and I think that's kind of what we're renegotiating right now, nationally,
Yeah.
internationally, and trying to find,
Mm.
because you want to keep something, because I think, diversity is good, but that doesn't mean everywhere becomes America, because I feel like there's definitely something that's lost in literature, art, history,
Yeah, but I meant it in the sense of, Norwegians are huge nature lovers. Swedish
Mhm.
people love to build things. In rural Sweden, every house is painted red because at one point of time that was the only color available, apparently. And now it's a cultural thing, and every house is painted red. That's not going to change because you drink Coke Zero. I'm just
Mhm.
saying that earlier, there is no indigenous alternative to Coke Zero.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's not like
Yeah.
every culture developed its own soda drink. I mean, maybe they did, but mostly
Mhm.
they don't. So where Americana enters is where there are cracks to be filled. So you should think about it like that Japanese poetry where there's
Mhm.
cracked,
With the
uh,
gold.
yeah, the gold
Uh-huh.
ikigai or whatever it's called.
I know what you're
It's
talking
like
about.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Americana is like that. It'll fill the cracks of your society and make you whole again and make it more beautiful again. Everything about Europe that's better today, the fact that Europe can fight, I just want to make a small mention of this, not segue into it completely, that
Mhm.
Europe can fight Russia and Ukraine today without the war spreading all over Europe when during World War II, in the same time frame, half of Europe had been conquered, is because of the learning from NATO, right? A French
Mhm.
friend of mine said this to me that it doesn't matter if America supports us or not. It would be nice if they did, but we have learned our lesson over the past 50 years from America themselves.
Mhm.
So, America is, again, it's an idea. It's not, you know, become like Donald Trump or become like Leo DiCaprio. It's an idea of freedom, of a certain, you know, if you're a girl, you can walk alone at night, ness of things,
Mhm.
right? And I find it very interesting, um, the way Americans look at this, because I think the only Europeans Americans interact with are these sort of very snooty leftist academic types who kind of look down on America. So Americans think everybody looks down on them, but that's not true. They're highly educated, intelligent, intellectual people all over Europe and all over the world who have huge respect for maybe not the government of America, but America as an idea. And that has
Mhm.
historically been true. Alexis de Tocqueville has written about how great America was. The French Revolution was inspired by the American Revolution. Um, I mean, I go to the Musée d'Orsay, and the first statue there is the Statue of Liberty. It's America is
Mhm.
beloved. It's very beloved.
Mhm.
I
Well,
got my first jeans when I was 12, and it was the greatest moment until then of my
mhm.
life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I think it's like I said, I think it with any of these things, it's always a renegotiation since culture is
Mm,
never static. Um,
mm,
it's finding a new balance and finding how to interact with each other as
mm.
things like this change, because it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting dynamic how we're seeing this change since I do feel like to that degree, if you want to view it that way, I think like American culture is probably something that's going to be pretty ubiquitous for a long time.
Yes. And like I said, nobody is giving up what they already have for American culture, right? There is no
Mhm.
Viking washing machine that you're giving up to get a, American washing machine.
Mhm.
The washing machine was invented in America. So you use the American style one or you don't. I mean,
Mhm.
if you want your work to be faster, you use it. If you want to spend 3 hours a day washing your clothes, then you don't. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not replacing something that is indigenous or, Swedish people celebrate all sort of summer festivals. They're not going to give that up to start celebrating Thanksgiving because, Thanksgiving is not in summer. I know people
Mhm.
who celebrate Thanksgiving in Europe, but since it's on a date when there's nothing else happening in Europe anyway, it doesn't matter.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's also like an Anglo thing. I think that the English do as well, but it's a different date or something like that. Because there's
Yeah,
a shared Anglo
yeah,
heritage there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
With the
no,
turkey and everything. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an interesting perspective, and that's part of why I like doing the podcast to talk to people outside of the U.S. And some people have positive ideas about it, like you. Some people not so much, but I think it's a
Yeah.
good temperature check since I grew up in Canada and moved to the United States when I was
Mhm.
shortly before 9/11, which is a very odd time to move to the United States. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
But it's I think it's a very interesting perspective that is granted because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Where you're not, do you not feel like an American, or I don't know, is Canada
no,
and America that different?
well, that's opening up a can of worms. Canada is often they define themselves by not being Americans, but having lived in both, kind of like you said, they're very, very culturally similar. But I think there's some distinct differences. But yes and no. Like to a certain degree, like when you talk about like the proliferation of American culture and American being an idea, to a certain degree, that's true. But I think also that provides sometimes a little bit of an identity crisis. But at the same time, I know like on my dad's side of the family, they came from England to the United States in like the 1600s as indentured servants. So on one level, it's been, nearly 500 years. And then my mom's side of the family came from Ireland at like the end of the 19th century. So I think in the United States specifically, I think there's a bit of an identity crisis going on to be like, all right, we were this one thing. There was good, there was bad. And then it was mostly just like, in the United States. And then after, World War II, the proliferation of American culture and business, what have you, I do think there's a lot of an identity crisis as what it means to be an American evolves. And I think that's kind of maybe the perspective I'm coming from in it as well. Like what does it exactly mean? And I think it's, like I said, it's going to be a renegotiation as we figure out what's going on for ourselves. As you've probably seen, I don't want, kind of like you said, to mention it, to not have it be its full digression. We're a very divided people right now, but we've been more divided. If I don't know how much depth of knowledge you have of American history, but we have been more divided. Obviously, there's the Civil War. I would say the end of the 19th century, where there was another very large, proportionately, I think it's only just now reached a similar proportion of immigration. There's a renegotiation, and like not that long ago, different European ethnicities were not small differences as we think of them now. So it's something that I think we can figure out, but as always, it's a renegotiation process. And as somebody who's historically minded, that's how I tend to see it. But it doesn't mean it's going to be a smooth transition.
Yeah, I agree. Historically, Swedish and Norwegian people, for example, were very different. But now, my Swedish and Norwegian friend, one of them talks in Swedish, the other person talks in Norwegian, and they understand each other. It's become that simple. And I also found out that 1/3 of all Swedish people in the 1800s left to the United States. That's not a small number. That's a huge number of people. And obviously from the rest of Europe also, half of Ireland, I think. And I think it's very interesting, like you said, that there's an identity crisis because you're all people from different places. But I think that's the coolest thing about America. And when I was younger, when I was a kid, I think I used to read Wikipedia pages of famous American actors, and I'd love to read the family life part of it, because it would always say something like Leonardo DiCaprio is 1/4 French, 1/3 blah, and 1/2 something else. And I would think that is so cool because you're not tied to any one culture, while I am not just from the same culture, I'm from the same community, the same caste, the same tribe, going back 2,000 years. And a lot of times, the reason that is because there's a penalty to break that. And to live in a country where nobody will punish you for marrying someone you're not supposed to marry is crazy to me. At least it used to be. The more I interact with Westerners and Americans, it's okay, that is the norm. And world over, that's the norm. And maybe my country is not the norm, right? That anybody can marry anyone else they want was a shocking information to me growing up.
And that's kind of what I was getting about. It's I think that's probably to our credit. I know myself, and I think a lot of people, there's just a feeling of rootlessness that is the other side of that, which kind of comes back to the identity crisis. And, I can do anything is nice on one level, but at the same time, there's not a lot of American culture that goes very far back in the past since there's this constant reinvention. But I think that's the trade-off in any culture and any place, any history. It's always, that's kind of what I read about. It's this constant interplay between seeing, okay, there's value to tradition, there's value to having historical rootedness, but you don't need to be so married to it that you're unwilling to be flexible, and at the same time, like, you're so flexible that you're topsoil on history, really. Anything can blow you away, and you don't have any rootedness. And I think that's kind of a part of this, like, global renegotiation that we're seeing, since I think people do want, at least speaking from the American perspective, a lot of people feel that lack of rootedness. And I think that's a part of, like, okay, well, who are we now? But at the same time, that's why people's, in some cases, at least, people's ancestors came to America to have that new experience and be able to,
Escape.
not be so connected. Yeah. So it's, like I said, it's a constant renegotiation.
Yeah. But I think the rootedness of America is in the idea, right?
Mhm.
You go, there can be a straight line drawn from Aristotle to Greek sororities and American colleges. Straight line drawn from Thomas Aquinas to the sort of, questioning mindset that you have, because that's what he did. He was a priest who questioned, who rediscovered Aristotle, integrated Aristotle's teachings into Christianity, and made Christianity the force that it is today, or at least was sometime back in King Henry's time, where great things happened. And there's very few religions that can say that about themselves.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of what I was alluding to. Like, I understand the argument could be made of that historical and cultural continuity, but basically nobody knows that here, and that's kind of the problem of the other side of the lack of rootedness. And again, I'll talk about this obliquely because I don't want it to be the whole discussion, but it's very right now. I think that's kind of what I think the history has been. It's like, all right, we are part of this this continuity, and then there's been, obviously, like, United States has done bad things. I think any country has. And then there's been the process of acknowledging those bad things. I think we're very caught up in that right now. So, and that's the only part of our past that we acknowledge. And I think that's created a kind of neuroticism, I guess you could say. And that, at least to me, that's, I don't think you can't, like, discount, say, the horrors of American slavery, for example, but at the same time, the United States, like Europe, specifically the United States, is, yes, there is chattel slavery much later than many other societies had it, but it's also one of the only societies that's, like, taken it upon itself to ban it. So
and went to war for it and died for it. Yeah,
so that's kind of
there is a
my
famous
project.
Indian. There is a famous Indian social reformer from the, I would say, late 1800s. He wrote a book, and he said this book is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln and and it was written in an Indian language. And he said this book is dedicated to Abraham Lincoln and everybody in America who fought to free slaves. And I don't know if Americans realize that they're the only country to have went to war with themselves to free people who didn't look like them. When I was a kid, I thought Abraham Lincoln was black. I seriously did, because I just heard his name and I heard that he helped to free black people. And I thought, okay, he did it because he was black. And then I saw a picture of him and it was a black and white drawing. And I said, okay, I guess. It was many years later that I realized he was white. And the first thing I asked was why? why would you, as someone from one clan, go to free someone from another clan? Because that has historically never happened.
Hmm.
You fight against your own in group to go and free someone from an out group is not how humans have worked historically. Americans are the only people to have done that.
Hmm.
And they set a precedent with the Civil War, and previously with fighting against their own in group. Again, a white king, white colonials fought against each other for freedom, wrote the first constitution on earth, um, you know the preamble of America. I mean, pursuit of happiness, these sort of things, these are all things that were unheard of historically in the world. And these are all great American achievements. And like I always say, Americans are probably like fish who are swimming in Americana. So they cannot see what we see. But for the rest of us, that water that you swim in is unbelievable because, we don't have it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's definitely a perspective that I can appreciate for sure. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a difficult time, I think, as we all, like across the globe, try to find out who
Yeah.
we are as, borders change. And this is something that's happened many times in history.
Mhm.
And I guess it's one of those things, like it's very difficult to say, as an American, to say positive things about America sometimes, just because I think there's been, because we do take it too far at times, and it's seen as like kind of culturally grubby, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. Like,
yeah.
if you're
That comes from,
educated person.
yeah, it comes from the Protestant and Puritan sensibility of not sort of beating your own drum. So I get
Mhm.
that. But also it means like really bad actors can weaponize any latent pride that people have. And also on the opposite end, bad actors can take the sort of humble approach into sort of almost a humiliation territory. Which is
Yeah.
why a decent sort of, um, I hate to say centrist, but a balanced perspective is important.
Hmm.
And like you said, talking to people who are not from America but who can see things from afar is crucial to that, because every time I speak to an American, they always go, "Wait, what?" Because I grew up in a country where it was dangerous to celebrate Valentine's Day. You could get
Hmm.
beaten by goons if you were seen in a park with a boy who gave you flowers and a chocolate,
Hmm.
even as a teenager. It was so dangerous. Um, so the very normalization of teenage dating, or giving flowers to someone, giving chocolates to someone. I see these cute videos where kids are giving chocolates to each other, really small kids. I think that's adorable. Or kids making Valentine's Day cards for everybody in their class. That's amazing. This normalization of male-female interaction that even historically in the West was not normalized, right?
Hmm.
Boys and girls grew up separately historically, even in England and in most of the West as well. So this new norm, I think it's very cool, and I love that Americans have sort of. I know a lot of Americans hate commercialization or whatever, but commercialization is good because it tells everybody else, hey, Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks did this in You've Got Mail, so you can do it too.
Hmm.
Because I'm not learning about flowers and dating from regular Americans. I'm learning it from movies because that's the only window to America that I have, given I live 12 hours away.
Hmm.
So it's good that you've commercialized the best things um, of your culture, because other people have access to it.
Hmm. Yeah. And like I said, it can be a give and take with any of this. And so these things
Mm.
can lose value when commercialized, and they can become too commoditized. Or at the same time, like it's good to have, if you've heard the phrase, like, you can be so open-minded that your brain falls out, much in the same way you can be so open culturally that you lose the foundations of what created that open culture in the first
Yes.
place.
Yes.
That can
I
be a
agree.
problem as well, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, where I think we're and I'm maybe repeating myself here, but in that renegotiation process, right? We need to maintain something of what we are. We can't, I don't want America to
And
be
let it go.
essentially a shopping mall where, there's nothing, nobody has a memory that goes, more than 20 years in the past, because
That would be very sad.
that would be, I think that would be a tragedy as well. But, I don't know. Also, like if you look at history and culture, like it's always changing, incorporating the old and the new together, and I think that's a process that,
Yes.
because America has just changed so much, even like with my lifetime alone. But talking to both
Yeah.
of my I think it's easy to have these ideas of America sometimes when you don't live here. Like there's huge parts of America that were like that, what you're describing, until fairly recently. Both of my parents grew up on farms, for example. So I think it's both, so to speak, writing and reading the book at the same time, which is kind of maybe why Americans are a very neurotic people, I think.
I also think, like you were saying, a lot of people don't know about this history. I think it has to do with lowering of educational standards, and this is something that's global. It's not just in America. People simply don't study enough of history, and so by the time you graduate school, you have very little perspective on how things have evolved. Like you said, everybody just remembers how things were 20 years ago. You don't remember, or you don't have a knowledge of how things were during World War II, during World War I, in the 16th century, 13th century. How far humans have come is something very few people know, because it's not taught to them, because of the lowering of educational standards. And that could also be one of the reasons why, like you said, Americans are so quote unquote neurotic, right? Because when you don't know anything beyond 9/11, how can you know anything at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably coming close to the end of our time here. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to impart to the audience? I think it's probably a good time to.
I think people should read history more. People should
Agreed.
read Aristotle more.
Mhm.
Read a lot of Aristotle, and watch a lot of movies. Like I just said it already, but pursue happiness. I think that's
Mhm.
very important. It's very important to look for happiness. Happiness doesn't just happen. You have to find things that make you happy. Go out and eat an ice cream, or
Mhm.
play with your dog. Just don't sit cooped up at your table all the time and then wonder why you're not happy.
I think it's excellent advice. Do you have any promotions or plugs you want to tell the audience about?
Someday I'll release the book I'm writing about, which is turning out to be a dystopia. I thought it'll be a rom-com, but
Oof,
might actually appeal to sci-fi people like you, because it's
many
turning
such
out to be a
cases.
futuristic dystopia.
We'll keep an eye out for that whenever it's released. So
Yes.
I'll go ahead and we'll sign off then with the final question I always ask guests. What's something that
Yeah.
makes you feel optimistic for the future?
I think around 22 is when I got suspended on Twitter, and I had a sizable account and everything went off, and I was feeling so, I would say, the anti-optimist for the first time, because I thought, oh my God, social media is such a terrible place. And then along comes Substack, and I'm optimistic again, because I get to meet so many great people whom apparently I had never met on Twitter, even though we all were on Twitter.
Mhm.
Uh, I think the future of digital media, though it sounds there's a lot of doom and gloom about it, I think the future is looking good. Because if more platforms like Substack come up, if the media fragmentation that is happening continues to happen, then we are all going to be in really cool mini parties of our own instead of being in one giant, disco bar run by Elon Musk.
Well,
So
that's
from a digital marketing perspective, I'm very, very optimistic that we are all going to be very happy online.
okay. Well, that's I think a good sentiment to end it on. Well, Mr. Manager, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a great time.
Thank you, Fester.
All right, you have a good one.